So tonight I want to talk about something that concerns me very much, and that's a measure or a bill that's being debated right now in the Houses of Parliament, specifically being put forth by our Home Secretary. And it's called the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, also known as the Police and Crime Bill. And it's being pushed through by the Conservative Party's Priti Patel, our Home Secretary. And what it's trying to do is take a lot of these lockdown anti-protest measures and push them into a post-lockdown world. And this concerns me very much, and it probably should concern you, because we just saw a case of this happen on Saturday when a bunch of women and men gathered to hold vigil and protest in Clapham because they were concerned about the safety of women on our streets of London, which is something they should be concerned about. And they wanted to assemble and hold a vigil and protest, and yet it was ripped apart by the Metropolitan Police and caused quite a scene that none of us were happy to see. Of course, that's being investigated. I've called for the mayor's resignation on the back of that. But those same types of rules could exist in a post-COVID world, and that makes me very concerned. Here's a few highlights from the bill that I wanted to read off for you. The government says this legislation will hand powers to the police to take a quote-unquote more proactive approach to manage quote-unquote highly disruptive protests. The bill will boost powers that police can use on so-called static protests. So it means even if you're just standing somewhere, you're not actually marching, they can still shut you down. It will also propose maximum noise limits on protests. And this is very concerning, including that of the human rights lawyer Amar Anwar, who said recently on Sunday the proposed bill is, quote, the most draconian piece of legislation in British legal history that will effectively outlaw peaceful protest. It's hard for me to believe that I'm even having this conversation with you right now, that this is being proposed at a time now when we know protests are important to question some of the many incorrect decisions our government made in the past year. And I'll talk about our freedom of speech fight last year because it relates to this. It goes on to say that the bill said it would target protests that cause a quote-unquote serious annoyance. And Mr. Anwar went on to say, what do you think a protest is all about? It's all about trying to show how annoyed you are with the system. And he goes on to conclude and says, quote, this is a fundamental attack on our human rights. This effectively gives the power lock, stock, and barrel to the police to do what they did on Saturday in Clapham. And we think this is ridiculous. Even Gracie Bradley, the director of Liberty, said, quote, parts of this bill will facilitate discrimination and undermine protests, which is the lifeblood of a healthy democracy. I agree. Goes on to say we should all be able to stand up for what we believe in, yet these proposals will give the police yet more powers to clamp down on protest, unquote. If this reminds you of that movie 1984, you're not alone, and it concerns me very much that we won't be allowed to protest. And this goes further from what we were fighting for last year, which is freedom of speech. Imagine a world where you can't say what you want digitally online. You can no longer hold protests to say how you feel about things, and the police can use noise measures or other such tactics to just shut down any form of protest. We could have repeats of Saturday every single weekend in this city unless we really stand up now and say, no, we deserve these basic human rights and basic civil liberties. And that's why freedom of speech and digital freedom of speech is one of my main policies as your next mayor of London. It's on my website, brianformayor.london, and it stands alongside my plans to rebuild London's economy, to fix our bankrupt transportation system, to get tough on crime, and to also build affordable housing. This is just as important, because if we can't voice our concerns with our police and with our government, well, then what are we really? We're not really citizens of a democracy. And so I am urging the members of the Conservative Party, the members of the Labour Party to vote against this bill. It doesn't make any sense. Again, it's hard for me to even believe that I'm having to talk to you about this. Just like last year, it was hard for me to believe that someone was trying to violate my basic right to freedom of speech. But these things happen every single day, and it's happening right now, right under our noses. The Home Secretary spent 3 hours today outlining her plans for this bill. It must be stopped. We must protect our liberties. Please leave me your comments below. At London Real, we've been fighting for free speech for the last 10 years, since 2011. This is just as important. Let's fight for these rights to protest. Let's honor the men and women who fought to have their vigil and protest on Saturday. and let's move forward with these basic human liberties. Thank you.